And now I have another article about politics in Star Trek that I wanted to read that was actually published on September 11th, 2016. And it appears in the U.S. Intellectual History blog. And this is a much more extensive article. Let's jump into it. It's a guest post that was written by Mike O'Connor. By most metrics, the success of Star Trek The Next Generation, from 1987 to 1994, dwarfed that which its predecessor Star Trek had received on NBC during its initial 66 to 69 run. While the first show had to be rescued from cancellation after its second season by a viewer letter-writing campaign, its successor ran for 7 years with solid ratings. Star Trek The Next Generation substantially enlarged the core audience for Star Trek, and eventually its characters and time frame replaced those from the original series as the focus of the feature films. Since then, the movies have come to feature younger actors playing the characters from the original series. Yet TNG had a mission beyond delivering ratings and making money for its studio. Star Trek was more than a television show. It embodied a particular philosophy that was one of the central aspects of its appeal. Gene Roddenberry, the auteur behind Star Trek, who is widely credited for supplying the vision that characterized the Star Trek universe, described the show in his statement to the world as his political philosophy and his overview on life and the human condition. Roddenberry created TNG and worked on its first few seasons. His declining health and increasingly erratic personal behavior led to him being eased out of positions of authority before his death in 1991. The extent to which Roddenberry was personally influential on the vision of Star Trek The Next Generation is a subject for debate, but the larger significance of his philosophical and ideological blueprint is beyond question. Media scholar Henry Jenkins explained that the new series had to carefully negotiate between the need to maintain continuity with the original series in order to preserve the core Star Trek audience and the need to rethink and update those conventions in order to maintain the program's relevance with contemporary viewers and expand its following. Philosophically, this meant that the later show had to distinguish between those ideas that were central to the ethos of Star Trek and those that needed to be modified or even abandoned to keep up with the spirit of the times. In the TNG episode Symbiosis, for example, the crew encounters two cultures, the Onarians and the Brekkians. The latter planet owes its entire economy to the production of an addictive drug for the former. The Onarians believe that the drug is medicine for a deadly disease, but the Enterprise's Dr. Crusher discovers they've not had the disease in generations, and now the drug only saves them from the effects of the withdrawal symptoms. Crusher claims that this is a case of exploitation of one group by another. Picard's only response is, "That's how you see it." He does not claim that he sees it in some other way, for presumably he does not. In this sense, he responds very similarly to the "who's to say" of Satris's philosophy students. Instead, the fact that the values of the two planets' inhabitants may differ from those of the Federation is sufficient to demonstrate to Picard the immorality of even telling the Onarians of what he has learned. In the episode Half a Life, Lwaxana Troi, mother of the ship's counselor Deanna Troi, meets and falls in love with Timicin, a man from the planet Kalon 2, which orbits a dying sun. Timicin is a scientist, the one who is closest to the solution to the problems that plague his planet. Unfortunately, Timicin turns 60 in a few days, and his people undergo a ritual suicide as they reach that age. Lwaxana begs Picard to intervene, but he insists that the Prime Directive forbids us to interfere with the social order of any planet. After trying and failing to convince Timicin to abandon his culture by refusing to participate in the ritual, called the Resolution, Lwaxana and Deanna are discussing the situation. Lwaxana says, "I've never considered how deeply ingrained this resolution ritual is." Deanna says, "Ritual provides structure, both good ones and bad ones." Lwaxana says, "Well, this is a bad one." Deanna says, "Your point of view." Characters in The Next Generation routinely point out that each other's opinions are, in fact, their opinions. This somewhat cloying observation is tossed around as though it trumps any possible moral position. This is because, from a relativist perspective, it does. Even Timothon's daughter, who is upset that she can't watch her father die, takes the moral high ground with Lwaxana by asserting that the latter is culturally insensitive. How dare you criticize my way of life and my beliefs? In another episode, Who Watches the Watchers, the crew is assigned to repair an anthropologist stationed on the planet Mintaka. Their high-tech duck blind renders the scientists invisible so that they can conduct anthropological research without the planet's inhabitants knowing that they're there. During the repair, two Mintakans see the duck blind. In the process of investigating it, one accidentally hurts himself quite badly. Crusher brings him up to the ship for medical care, and Picard is not happy about it. Crusher says, "Before you start quoting me the Prime Directive, he'd already seen us and the damage was done. It was either bring him aboard or let him die." Picard says, "Then why didn't you let him die?" Crusher says, "Because we're responsible for his injuries." Picard says, "I'm not sure that I concur with that reasoning, Doctor." Here, Picard, the decision-maker on the Enterprise D, makes it clear that the maintenance of a culture's integrity is more morally important than the rights of the individual to his or her own life, to more common-sense notions of fair play. But the show does not take a consistent relativist line. Justice finds the crew on a planet whose inhabitants, the Edo, only punish randomly selected crimes. For any transgression, however, the penalty is death. When Dr. Crusher's son Wesley is unlucky enough to be in a punishment zone when he breaks a window, the full weight of the law comes down upon him. Picard is willing to sacrifice those under his command for the goals of his mission. What he presumably is not willing to do is allow his crew member to die for an offense that he views as trivial. In this case, at least, Picard appears to take the line that Wesley's right to live is more important than the Edo's right to live by their own values. The idea that the Edo respect for order may in fact be a better way to organize society than his own emphasis on individuality appears to play no role in his decision-making. Thus, the Prime Directive, which could be a troubling but ultimately self-congratulatory nuisance for liberal humanist Kirk, is a site of serious tension, if not hypocrisy, for Picard. Mike Hartenstein has written that on The Next Generation, the Prime Directive was observed more strictly. That is to say, it was given more sophisticated lip service. Yes, Captain Picard will break the Prime Directive, but not without soul-searching and hand-wringing. On my reading, however, the issue is more challenging than that. The philosophy of cultural relativism has little relevance when the vast majority of people that you meet belong to the same culture. Few of us in the viewing audience have the opportunity to decide whether we should impose our moral views on a people who do not share them. Picard, in his fictional Star Trek universe, actually has to put this doctrine to the test. Thus, his problems are like a laboratory experiment in cultural relativism. To my mind, this experiment reveals two interesting results. The first is that telling a satisfying story with a relativist moral is a difficult, if not impossible, task. If the truly noble thing to do is to never interfere or impose, then a television episode trying to advocate such a course of action will consist of 44 minutes of our heroes debating and analyzing a situation before ultimately doing nothing at all. So Pen Pals, for example, the Enterprise's helmsman Data has been chatting via a sort of interstellar ham radio with a little girl who lives on a remote planet. Natural events are causing the girl's planet to disintegrate. When Data asks Picard to use the ship to save the planet, the captain takes the position that rescuing a group from a natural disaster without their knowledge leads down the slippery slope toward cultural imperialism. During the ensuing conversation between several Enterprise officers, each offers a slightly different take on what the ship should do. One even calls the Prime Directive callous and cowardly in this instance. Picard, claiming that one of the functions of the Prime Directive is to protect us from our emotions, finally decides that the ship will take no action to save the planet. At the very last minute, however, the captain overhears a transmission from Data's friend. He's emotionally moved and changes his mind. This is hardly a surprise. It's difficult, if not impossible, to imagine an American primetime television series in which the heroes would simply proceed on their way when they had the opportunity to save billions of people with little trouble to themselves. But it is nonetheless inconsistent. If liberal humanism runs the risk of an arrogant cultural imperialism, cultural relativism can lead to a shocking lack of concern for the welfare of individuals. TNG sees these problems, but does not offer a solution with any real confidence. Because Star Trek The Next Generation deals with problems that relativism raises, but does not have a compelling answer for them, many plot resolutions are rather wishy-washy. Even Pen Pals is not willing to take a clear stand on the issue it raises. At the very end of the episode, Picard orders that Data's friend's memory be wiped of any knowledge of the Enterprise, through a scientific technique that had not been mentioned up to the point in which it is used. If no one on the planet has any knowledge that Picard's ship was ever there, then in the sense the crew did not interfere. The captain can have his relativist cake and eat it too. Hartenstein has pointed out the prevalence of these deus ex machina endings, whereby a seemingly difficult moral choice is rendered unnecessary or inconsequential by a sudden turn of events. Yet even he fails to notice that the vast majority of his own examples come from TNG rather than TOS. In the episode Justice, discussed earlier, Picard takes Wesley from the Edo, but ultimately has to deal with their technologically superior god who is orbiting the planet. The god threatens to destroy Picard for interfering with the Edo, but Picard argues from a decidedly non-relativist position that there can be no justice so long as laws are absolute. It is the god rather than the Edo themselves that is the true arbiter of Edo morals. Thus, its approval of Picard's actions suggests that, in this case, the relativist and humanist projects yield the same result. But the audience is deprived of an answer to the really interesting question, the one that David Gerald says should define a dramatic episode. What people really want to know is, what would Picard have decided if he had to choose between violating the Prime Directive and allowing Wesley to die? In this case, Picard is allowed to violate the Prime Directive, but have his action blessed by the culture whose mores were fundamentally disrespected. Like Pen Pals, this episode slinks out of Picard having to take a stand on what values are most central to him. Philosopher Richard Rorty observed that the novel, the movie, and the TV program have, gradually but steadily, replaced the sermon and the treatise as the principal vehicles of moral change and progress. It is through these fictional forms, he argued, that we describe the kinds of pain we inflict on one another. Armed with this knowledge, we can hopefully begin to eliminate them. If Rorty is correct, then the inability of Star Trek The Next Generation to tell a compelling story with a cultural relativist message is of more than merely academic interest. It suggests that relativism as a comprehensive ethical system may never achieve more than a parasitical check on the tendencies toward ethnocentrism to which liberal humanism is always subject. This is still a significant contribution, one that should not be minimized. But the example of TNG also has a message for American political liberalism. Democratic politics is about the swaying of hearts and minds, and central to this endeavor is the ability to tell resonant, meaningful stories. The show's difficulty in articulating a consistent relativist position suggests that the extent to which the liberal political project is animated by this doctrine is the extent to which it is unlikely to succeed. I know, an academic article, but an article that I felt worth sharing. If you didn't get all that, I don't know if I did the best. My throat and having a cold, but it is linked down below. And I felt that that article was definitely worth sharing. And that was written by Mike O'Connor, a candidate for the Master of Public Affairs at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin. He has published the article Liberals in Space, the 1960s Politics of Star Trek. So there you go. I hope you weren't too bored by that, but I found it to be very interesting.